Police searched for 35 years. The killer had been living almost next door the entire time. By the time they finally had his name, it didn't matter anymore. You'll understand why by the end of this one.
April 24th, 1986. Bedford, Texas, a small city between Dallas and Fort Worth. Janet Elaine Love was 32, a ticket agent for Delta Airlines. The kind of steady, unremarkable job that means you show up on time every day without anyone thinking twice about it. That's exactly what made it strange when hers did. Two coworkers went to check on her. They found her inside her apartment off L. Don Dotson Drive. She had been sexually assaulted, shot, killed in her own home. The apartment itself was small. Nothing about it suggested a robbery gone wrong. Nothing was torn apart, nothing obviously missing. Neighbors on either side told police they hadn't heard anything unusual that night. An ordinary Thursday had, sometime in the hours no one was watching, become a crime scene. There were no obvious signs pointing investigators toward a suspect. No forced door that told a clear story. No witness who'd seen someone come or go. Police did what departments in 1986 could do with what they had. They canvassed the complex. They interviewed her coworkers, her friends, anyone who'd crossed paths with her in the weeks before. None of it produced a name. Over the next 35 years, 15 different detectives inherited the same file. 15 different people taking on the same dead ends, the same unanswered question, passed down like a shift change. The case didn't just go cold once, it stayed cold through all 15 of them. The reason this case survived at all wasn't a witness, it was DNA. Detectives had the killer's DNA almost from the very beginning. They entered it into CODIS, the FBI's national database. They waited. No match. A few years passed. A detective retired. The file moved to the next desk. They checked again. Still nothing. Another few years. Another detective. Another look at the same evidence. Same result. No match. Why? For over 3 decades, nobody outside the department had an answer to that. Here's the part that changes how you should be hearing all of this. CODIS only works if the person you're looking for is already inside it, arrested before, convicted of something serious enough to require a DNA sample on file. If your killer had simply never been caught for anything else in his life, the most advanced DNA science in the world could run his profile 1,000 times and come back empty every single time. The evidence was never the problem. The database was. Detectives already had the killer's DNA. They just had nobody to compare it to. At the end of 2020, Bedford police stopped waiting on CODIS entirely. A Texas Department of Public Safety grant, funded through the U.S. Department of Justice, existed to pay for a completely different approach: forensic genetic genealogy. That decision changed everything, but not because the killer had finally shown up in some family tree website, uploaded and waiting to be found. He hadn't. That's the part almost nobody outside the field understands. A genealogist did something closer to reverse engineering a stranger from the outside in. Start with the DNA profile from the crime scene. Search it against a public genealogy database, not for a direct match because there wasn't going to be one, but for anyone who shared a small fraction of that DNA. A third cousin, maybe. Someone who'd spit in a tube for a completely unrelated reason, curious about their own family history, with no idea their sample would ever matter to a murder investigation. From that one distant cousin, build outward. Great-grandparents, their other descendants, every branch of a tree that had nothing to do with a crime, until the branches themselves started pointing toward one specific limb. Hundreds of names, gradually narrowed by age, by location, by which relatives could and couldn't be ruled out, until only one man was left standing at the end of all those branches. To confirm it, detectives needed something more solid than a family tree. They asked 2 of the man's relatives to voluntarily give DNA for a kinship analysis at the University of North Texas Center for Human Identification, proving biologically that this specific family had produced their suspect.
It confirmed a name: Ray Anthony Chapa. He was 19 years old in 1986. He lived less than 1,000 feet away, about a 3-minute walk. 35 years. 15 detectives. Nobody had ever once looked at him. It's worth sitting with why, because it's not the story you'd expect. He wasn't overlooked. Nobody missed an obvious clue sitting in a file somewhere. He simply never appeared in the investigation at all. No relationship to Janet, no argument on record, no prior arrest serious enough to land his DNA in any database anyone could search. No motive investigators could ever point to, then or now. He didn't slip through a crack in the case. There was no crack. There was just no reason, in 1986 or for decades afterward, for anyone to ever write his name down in the first place. He died in January of 2021, a terminal illness, in a small town called Bluffdale. Detectives didn't confirm his identity as Janet Love's killer until that September, 8 months after his body was already in the ground. Science arrived 8 months too late.
There would be no trial, no sentencing, no moment where Janet Love's family got to sit in a courtroom and watch him answer for it. What they got instead was a phone call and a police chief telling reporters he was 100% certain they finally had the right man. Janet's sister, Rebecca Roberts, had spent over 3 decades carrying a case that never closed. When it finally did, she didn't describe it as relief. "None of it's going to bring her back," she said, "but it is some sense of justice. Some, not all. That distinction matters more here than almost anywhere else, because for this family, there was never going to be a full version of justice available, no matter what the DNA eventually proved." Investigators are still working with the FBI to find out if Ray Chapa hurt anyone else, in Texas or in any of the other states he passed through over the decades. As of now, they don't know. His name sits inside that same national database now, too, the one that couldn't find him for 35 years, quietly checked against every other case, still waiting on its own answer. There's a specific kind of grief that comes from a case like this one. Not the grief of never knowing, not the relief of a conviction either. Something in between that doesn't have a clean name. A family gets a real answer, finally, after 35 years without one. And the answer arrives with nothing left to do with it. Janet Love's case wasn't solved because detectives found better evidence. It was solved because science finally learned how to use the evidence they'd had all along. 35 years, 15 detectives, one answer. 8 months too late. In most cold cases, detectives are the ones trying to solve them. This one was different. The person who forced Dallas to reopen this case wasn't a detective. It was the woman he attacked. August 1985, North Dallas. KREJCI was asleep in her apartment when she heard the door open. A man came in. He forced her onto her stomach and tied her wrists behind her back. He raped her, a gun against her head the whole time, threatening to shoot if she didn't stay quiet. She never saw his face. Not clearly. Not enough to describe him to police in any way that mattered. What she remembered was his eyes. He disappeared. Carrie survived. The investigation didn't. For 35 years, nothing happened at all. There was no suspect to chase, no name to run, no forced entry evidence pointing anywhere specific. Just a case that went into a drawer with hundreds of others exactly like it. Here's what most people don't know about a case like this one. It doesn't just sit there quietly. KREJCI spent those 35 years as part of a survivor support group, showing up to meetings for other women whose assaults had happened decades before hers, watching some of their cases get solved while hers stayed exactly where it started. She wasn't just waiting. She was watching the technology get better in real time, one other woman's case at a time,
wondering when it would finally be her turn.
In 2019, something changed. Texas created a legal path to prosecute decades-old sexual assault cases if DNA could identify a serial offender. The following year, Dallas County's DA office used a new technique for the first time: forensic genetic genealogy, the same method that had just caught the Golden State Killer in California. It led them to a name in an unrelated 1985 case: David Thomas Hawkins. KREJCI heard about it on the news.
She didn't wait for anyone to reach out to her. She emailed the prosecutor herself, a cold case attorney named Leighton D'Antoni, and described in detail an unsolved serial rape case in Dallas that she believed deserved a second look with the new technology. D'Antoni believed it was worth another look. He sent the case to the FBI. Most family trees take weeks to build. This one took less than a day.
"We identified our suspect within 24 hours, D'Antoni said. A name wasn't enough to make an arrest, though. Knowing who someone isn't the same as proving they committed the crime. Investigators needed his actual DNA, collected fresh, not just a genealogical probability. So they did what departments increasingly do in cases like this. They watched him and waited for him to throw something away without thinking about it.
Discarded trash gave them what they needed. The lab's answer came back at odds of 1 in a trillion. It was him. David Thomas Hawkins, 74 years old, former dentist, husband, father.
And detectives now believed? A serial rapist. He'd spent a decade or more moving through North Texas along a travel route that put him near dozens of women's front doors in more than one city, across more than one state line.
In 1985, when he raped KREJCI, he was married to his second wife. She was pregnant with his child at the time.
Investigators connected his DNA to assaults across Dallas and as far away as Shreveport, Louisiana. Different cities, different police departments, cases that had never once been compared against each other because nobody had a reason to think they belonged together. Detectives believed they had finally uncovered a serial predator. They had no idea how much bigger the case was about to become. Then, Hawkins did something nobody expected. He confessed.
Not just to the assaults police already knew about. Around 30 more. 30 additional assaults spread across a decade that investigators had never been able to connect to a single person. Because for 35 years, there had been no way to connect them at all. 30 women who, as far as the record shows, had no idea their attacker had a name, let alone that he'd done this to dozens of others along the same stretch of road.
In September 2021, David Thomas Hawkins was sentenced to 4 life sentences. The hearing happened during COVID, with everyone in the courtroom in masks, including Hawkins.
Before KREJCI read her statement, she asked him to take his off. She wanted to see his face. 36 years after the only thing she'd ever had of him was the color of his eyes.
A victim advocate read statements from other survivors that day, too. Women describing years of sleeping with the lights on, checking the same locks over and over before bed, carrying a fear that never fully went away, even after they'd built entire lives on top of it. After the sentencing, a reporter showed KREJCI a recent photo of Hawkins from prison. "Same eyes," she said. "Same monster."
KREJCI got something Janet Love's family never could. A face, a courtroom, a moment where the person responsible had to sit there and hear exactly what he'd taken from her. But sit with the number for a second. 30 more women, unconnected for 35 years, only surfaced because one survivor refused to let her own case stay closed in a drawer. How many more files are still sitting in evidence rooms across the country, waiting for the technology that finally catches up?
It took Texas investigators 4 years to identify this man. There will never be an arrest. By the end of this one, you'll understand why that's still worth telling.
March 27, 2004, Bastrop County, Texas. An elderly woman woke up to a stranger inside her home. She never expected anyone to come through that door. Someone did.
Investigators collected DNA from the scene. It went into CODIS, the same national database that had failed Janet Love's case for 35 years. This time, it didn't take 35 years to find something. It took 7 months. By October, the DPS crime lab in Austin flagged a match, not to a name, but to another case. A sexual assault in Smithville back in 1997. Same pattern. An elderly woman, a break-in, a stranger. 2 cases, 7 years apart, now tied to the same unknown man. The following year, a third match. July 2005. Same pattern again. Investigators didn't have a name, but they had something almost as important: certainty. This wasn't 3 unrelated crimes anymore. This was one man, targeting elderly women in their own homes across at least 8 years. They started collecting DNA samples from potential suspects, person after person, over the years that followed. None of them matched. Here's where most departments would have quietly let this go. A serial case with no leads, no new evidence, and a growing stack of excluded suspects doesn't often stay a priority forever. This one didn't go away. It went into a different kind of waiting. In 2021, the Texas Rangers determined the case qualified for a federal program most people have never heard of: the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative, SAKI, funded through the Department of Justice specifically to give cold cases like this one a second chance at the kind of testing that didn't exist when they first went cold. On August 11, 2021, a lab called Bodie Technologies began advanced DNA testing and genealogy research on evidence from all 3 assaults: 1997, 2004, and 2005. Remember how fast KREJCI's case moved once genealogy got involved? 24 hours. This one took 4 years. Genealogy doesn't move at one speed. Sometimes the family tree practically builds itself. Sometimes it doesn't. Thin DNA, sparse public records, a family that simply never took an ancestry test. 4 years of quiet, unglamorous work, testing and retesting, before anyone had a name to attach to any of it. In August 2025, they finally did. Emory Earl McVAY of Smithville, Texas, the same small town where the very first assault in this pattern happened, back in 1997. His only criminal record was burglary, property crime, multiple convictions scattered across central Texas. Nothing that ever suggested what investigators now believe he did to at least 3 elderly women over nearly a decade. Nothing that ever put him on anyone's radar for this. Now for the part that changes what this case actually is. Emory Earl McVAY was already dead. 15 years before his name ever meant anything to the people who'd spent 4 of those years specifically looking for it. There will be no trial, no sentencing, no moment where the women he attacked or their families get to hear him answer for any of it. The case is, in the fullest legal sense, solved, and there is nothing on earth the state of Texas can now do about it. 4 years of work, thousands of hours, DNA analysts, genealogists, rangers, detectives, every one of them working toward the same goal. A courtroom that would never exist. Was it still worth it? Every family in this trilogy would probably answer that differently. Janet Love's sister got a name 8 months after the only person who could explain it was already dead. KREJCI got a face, a courtroom, and 30 more women's worth of answers nobody expected. The families connected to Emory Earl McVAY get exactly what Rebecca Roberts got: a name. And nothing else that a name can usually buy you. 3 cases, 3 different speeds, 24 hours in one, 4 years in another, 35 in the third. None of them ended with handcuffs. None of them ended with a jury. Some ended with a prison sentence. Some ended with a death certificate. all of them ended with the same thing: an answer. Some files stay closed. Others keep calling someone back. Those are the ones we open, one exhibit at a time.
This is the 9th exhibit.